Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Two Chicks, Three Seats. If you listened to last week's episode, then you heard our awesome conversation with Andrew Ridgie of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, where we discussed the Restaurant Relief Fund. This fund is part of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that includes $28.6 billion worth of grant money for restaurants to spend on various needs. The fund includes a lot of details about the specific ways that the grant money can be spent, when it can be spent, who gets what exactly, and so on. We covered a little bit of this on last week's episode, but we're going to dive deeper into everything today. So today we're going to discuss this fund in as much detail as possible so that everyone can get a better understanding of what this means for you and for the industry as a whole.
Yes. And it's good for us too, because I feel like that it's so confusing and I'd like to know exactly who's going to get it and, for our customers and for information and stuff like that. So let's start off with who qualifies for the Restaurant Relief Fund grant money. And so the basics regarding exactly what entities in the hospitality industry can benefit from this money. And this was taken right from the grant. So we'll explain it after I read it, basically word for word. So an eligible entity is a business that is owned or operated as of March 13th, 2020, and can own 20 or fewer establishments. So this money is targeting like smaller restaurants as opposed to huge restaurant groups, although restaurant groups can still benefit to some extent. It's just a little bit different. So eligible entities specifically include a restaurant, obviously, food stand, food truck, food cart, a caterer, saloon, an inn, tavern, a bar, lounge, brew pub, tasting room, tap room, or a licensed facility or premises of a beverage alcohol producer where the public may taste products. So like, for example, there's a place near me that makes bourbon, and like they do like events there, but you can taste the bourbon on site. So they can get money from this as well. Or even similar places of business in which the public or patrons assemble for the primary purpose of being served food or drink. So that's really specific, obviously, but we want everyone to understand that it's not just a restaurant that benefits, but also smaller entities like food trucks and those that we just mentioned. So when it comes to restaurant groups, like I said before, there is a cap of $10 million per restaurant group. And for individual venues, it's a cap of $5 million per venue. So publicly traded companies or restaurants with more than 20 locations will not be eligible. So that's those huge restaurant groups that they actually do make up a good portion of the industry. You're like, I'm trying to think of a good example, like the company that owns like Applebee's and they own like 10 other franchises, like they can't get this money. They have like thousands of locations across the country. Starbucks, obviously, no, sorry, Starbucks, you cannot benefit from this. But those types of businesses, and even ones that, that may seem smaller, but when you start looking them up online, they have like 6 different restaurant types and then like 20 of each of those types scattered across the country. So they would not be eligible. So it's the smaller groups that we're talking about when it comes to groups.
Right. I know, I feel like it gets a little tricky, but once you like really look into the details, it makes more sense.
Yeah. And it makes sense. It totally makes sense for the people who can get it, because I think one of the issues with the PPP is that these huge companies were getting this money and they didn't need it and it didn't make any sense. And then the smaller ones were left out to suffer even more.
Wow. So. Ironically, now it benefits the masses opposed to just the big corporations and big businesses.
Imagine that.
Imagine that after changing. Okay. Anyways.
Yep. Let's not get into politics.
Okay. So the next question is, how is the grant money getting calculated and prioritized? So basically looking at the overall picture of the money that's there. So the fund starts off with $28.6 billion in general, which is allocated to restaurants and entities like you just mentioned. And then according to the fund, about $5 billion of that is being set aside for smaller venues whose annual gross receipts were below $500,000. And so that's obviously targeting like the smaller ones as well, putting aside that special $5 billion for them. And it's predicted with that $5 billion that could be taking care of about 20,000 restaurants if they've requested on average $250,000. So I was reading somewhere how this is really beneficial too, to just like really target these small places instead of just putting them in with the rest of the big fund. So then obviously you take away that $5 billion and you're left with the $23.6 billion for all the other restaurants and entities included in the fund. So to calculate how much money each entity is going to receive, you subtract your 2020 revenues from your 2019 revenues, and then you subtract any PPP money that you received, and that final total is how much you receive in a grant. And again, not loan grant. So that's why this is so much better than before. There's some other special case scenarios to consider, like if you weren't open for the entire year of 2019 or 2020, then the amount will be calculated looking at either a monthly average of your 2019 revenue and or with just specific expenses incurred during the specific time period of the pandemic and what this fund runs for. So, it gets a little trickier when you have certain specifics, but in general, it's the 2020 revenue subtracted from 2019 revenue minus PPP money that you received. And then another interesting point that I didn't know beforehand, I don't know if you knew this, Kate, but there's prioritization of the grant money. So for the first 21 days of its rollout, then establishments owned by women, veterans, or economically and socially disadvantaged groups will be prioritized.
I did
So they're
not know
really
that.
like, yeah, I thought that was really interesting also.
It is.
How they're being more specific and looking at certain owners, and they're making these decisions by different people who they think should be getting the money first.
Yeah, that's great. Wow, I didn't realize that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I like that a lot.
I mean, I think again, it makes sense. Like you want to
Yeah.
prioritize those who need it the most, and that's what they're seeing is who could need it the most are these groups of people, which makes
Right?
sense.
Wow, imagine something coming from our government that it's fair.
Wow.
Just saying. Wow, this is a change of pace. Okay, so now that we know what it is and who can get it and how much you may be eligible for, let's talk about what can the grant money be used for. So there is a specific list of expense types that this money can be used for. They include payroll. So that excludes employee compensation exceeding $100,000 per year, which makes sense. And then employee benefits also can be used. You can use the grant money for, and paid sick leave. You can also use it for mortgage, rent, and or utilities, maintenance, outdoor seating construction, which is great because so many people like spent any money they had to make these outdoor seating arrangements. So you can use it for that. You can use it for supplies, protective equipment, cleaning materials, food and beverage, obviously, operational expenses, and debt obligations to suppliers, because a lot of people went deep into debt this past year because of the pandemic. So that's great. If the funds are not fully used by the end of 2021, then they will be returned to the government and cannot roll over into 2022, which could change, I think, depending on how long restrictions are kept going and, what if there's another outbreak or whatever the case may be. So, and I think it seems too early for us to tell how exactly the fund money will play out. But we were told by Andrew Ridgie last week on last week's episode that Senator Schumer, who has been a huge advocate for this fund, has stated the fund should be replenished if it were to run out. And I do think that a lot of people feel that way. At least a lot of Democrats, I think, feel that way. So we'll see what happens. But this money is huge for the industry, right? So all the expenses that it can be used for are certainly areas that restaurants had to fight to afford throughout the pandemic. And the money will help bring back millions of jobs across the industry and bring back a lot of the restaurants that we love and miss. And yeah, I think it's great.
I wonder, like, if restaurants had fully closed their doors, do you think people could bounce back, or what do you think about that?
I don't
Is it just like, is
think
that kind of impossible now?
Yeah, I feel like, unfortunately, when it comes to because, it's sort of like there are so many restaurants that fail every day without a pandemic. I mean, the restaurant industry is one of if not toughest, one of the toughest industries to survive in and to do well in, not just survive. Because surviving is one thing, but like doing well in, that's a whole other thing. I just like flung this. I'm getting very amped up here. No, but I think, I do think, I mean, it's not impossible, but I just think that so much was lost that, yeah, I'm not sure. It's such a hard industry. I've had friends who have opened restaurants and and they had so much experience, because you see a lot of restaurants that don't do well, and you're always like, especially coming from the industry, working in the industry for so long, my mind always immediately goes to, oh yeah, another a guy with tons of money who was like, I want to own a restaurant, and then it failed because he had no idea what he was doing. It happens all the time, but there are so many people out there who have years and years of experience working in the industry, and they can't keep it afloat. So I think after something as gut wrenching as this pandemic was to the industry, I don't think that that's probably going to happen for most people.
I mean, I feel like it's also really sad because it's taken this long for this fund to roll out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's hard.
It's definitely a disappointment.
Say what if now, but it's like if this had come out like 5 months ago, just think of the restaurants that could have still been open.
It sucks. And because like the PPP, like the first, like those that of course they were loans, it wasn't a grant, but people got so excited about that. And I remember like a year ago, people being so excited about it and then realizing how horrible it was. And it really didn't help anyone. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there it did help, but it didn't help the ones that didn't make it. You know what I mean? And I'm sure they took it. And that PPP loans could have been the reason why some of these restaurants ended up failing. And that sucks even more. So I mean, I don't know whose fault that is. I think a lot of people didn't realize how long this was going to go on. So maybe they thought like, okay, we're going to be better by the summer. So let's just throw them something now and they'll be able to pay it back. But obviously that wasn't true. So whose fault is it? Who knows? But yeah.
I mean, it's obviously been a devastating year. So everything that's happened has been sad.
I know.
I know. Okay.
Anyways, this is happy though.
This is happier. So obviously this restaurant relief fund is part of the bigger American Rescue Plan, which in total is $1.9 trillion, which helps every other aspects as well, not just the restaurant industry too. But as most people know, and many people may have already received, the Rescue Plan also gives a $1,400 stimulus check to all Americans who qualify. And this eligibility for this check is even more inclusive than the previous checks. So it's expected that around 85% of Americans will receive this one. It started going out this week. So a lot of people have been receiving it, more will receive it. But this is obviously beneficial to everyone, anyone who just needs this extra money right now, but also to the hospitality industry, because with more money in American pockets, then hopefully there's going to be an increase in spending and fueling the economy, definitely including to restaurants.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is all good things. And even if like restaurant management is receiving stimulus checks, then they could be putting that back into the business. So aside from just the direct impact of the restaurant relief fund to restaurants, the whole economic impact of the American Rescue Plan is also positive. And then there's also some other smaller pieces of the rescue plan that directly will impact the hospitality industry and its workers. So for example, there was an extension of unemployment to gig workers, including food delivery service workers. The extension falls under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program and goes until at least the end of August. So this can cover hopefully like the third-party workers who may have been laid off because of restaurants closing, not having work, everything like that. When it comes to healthcare insurance protections, laid off workers like cooks and waiters, they'll definitely benefit here. So employers or insurers will have to pay the full cost of an ex-employee's COBRA premium through the end of September. And this is an increase from what it used to be. It used to be they would have to pay off 15% of the premium, and now it's going to be paid in full.
Oh, wow.
And so this is an enhanced measure to protect the health of the jobless hospitality workers who have been struggling. And the source I was reading this from was saying the average monthly cost of family COBRA plans is about $1,700.
Jesus. Oh my God.
So,
it's like a mortgage.
Right.
It's crazy.
I mean, that money can now go elsewhere to pay for other things that are important for your livelihood. So this new addition, even if it seems like a small detail on the entire plan, is going to be, it could be like life-changing for some people.
Absolutely.
And especially it was talking about how it impacts the hospitality workers. So very relevant here. And then another little piece of the American Rescue Plan is also providing roughly $22 billion to the states for assisting tenants with rental costs, missed payments, home energy costs, things like that. So this could also be helpful for unemployed restaurant workers who have struggled to pay for rent while being unemployed during this pandemic as well. So there's definitely other little pieces like those three, and there's others as well that are included in this big plan that help the general public and unemployed workers, but also a lot of the hospitality industry workers, because we all know that millions of them were a big part of getting hit in the pandemic. So
yeah, for sure.
These little details are helpful too.
I've been really enjoying the on TikTok, the people who are making those like stimmy.
Oh my God.
Like dying laughing. This one woman, it's like, I think a bunch of people did this, but this one woman specifically, I wish I remember her name, but she did one like each child was like, she called them like little stimmy, big stimmy. I was like, oh my God, this is so funny.
Oh my God.
She was like, let me introduce you to my stimmies. And it's like her kids.
Yeah, because that's why it's so different from all the other
Oh my
stimulus
God,
checks,
yeah.
because this one's way more inclusive and it covers more people.
It
So like
covers more people. Yeah. Like, I mean,
like college students who are like
Yeah.
dependents on their parents, they wouldn't have been included before and it would have just gone to the parents, but then now they could get their own money. And I mean, I feel like a lot of college students may have been hospitality industry workers, like
Absolutely,
working a
yeah.
college job, waitressing, bartending, whatever.
Mhm.
So this is helping those people and all the
It's
other
huge.
little stimmies, like
Little stimmies out there, my two little stimmies. And in addition to that, there's the tax break on, on tax cut on children. So
Yeah.
like that's a huge one too. Like my husband and I are like, wait, we're gonna get a check, $300 each child for like, I don't even know how many months, but so $600 a month, which I'm like, that's huge.
Maisie's been out of work, Kate.
I mean, Maisie's struggling, okay? No, but honestly, like that pays for Colby's summer camp, which we were like, I don't know how we're gonna pay for Colby to go to summer camp because it's so expensive. And now I'm like, now I don't have to like, now at least 3 days a week he can go and I don't have to like, entertain him while I'm trying to work from home.
Exactly.
So it's huge. I think, and in addition, now we'll have extra money to do things like go to restaurants and support the industry. So definitely huge. But all of these things are great. Obviously, there's still a lot more that needs to be done for the hospitality industry specifically. And the relief fund is a huge step in the right direction and will help countless businesses and employees stay afloat during a devastating year. But it's not the end all be all solution that will fix the industry overnight. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be done. I was actually talking to one of my son's friends from school. Sometimes we meet up at the park with like a bunch of parents and the kids play, whatever. And he used to own restaurants in Somerville, and now he does like accounting for restaurants as a consultant. And we went on for like an hour. The other mothers were probably like, well, it was him and I, and then mothers, and they were probably annoyed with our conversation. But like, we were going on and on about how the industry, like all this is great because they had just passed it when I saw him last. But like we were basically like not doom and gloom, but almost like it's gonna take years for the industry to be anywhere near what it was before, which is sad. And yes, like this kind of like, this is such a tough thing to say, but it did get rid of like the saturation in the restaurant industry because so many places closed, and some of them, were great places that it's horrible, and others maybe weren't so great and they were saturating the market. So, but it's just going to take a long time for things to be the way they were, or if they ever are going to be the way they were again. So, so this is a great step in the right direction, but obviously a lot more needs to be done. And last week on the episode with Andrew Ridgie, if you haven't listened to it, you should definitely go back and listen to the full episode because it was really great. He had so much great insight. But we want to reiterate a few points and add a couple of new things about some of the pre-pandemic industry challenges that should now be built back again. Differently, obviously. So rent, we were talking to him about, especially in places like New York City and Boston, these big cities, it's just so high. Like the rent is so high. And when talking to him last week had me remembering writing checks. So this is like, 2006, not 2005, 2006. When I was working, as the director of events, and I had to write, sometimes I'd have to write the check for the rent. And I just remember the first time I did it, I was like, is this number correct? Like, granted it was a huge nightclub in downtown Boston, but our rent was $32,000 a month. So I was like, is this correct? Like, am I right? And everyone was like, yeah. And I'm like, and that was so long. It was 15 years ago, $32,000. And let me tell you, it wasn't the nicest building ever.
Right.
Kind of a shithole. Yeah. $32,000 a month. So yes, on a good Saturday night, we brought in $30,000, but that's not revenue. That's not money in our pockets. That's like, we have to pay for everything. You know what I mean? So I don't know. We could afford it because we were doing very well, but that's so much money. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a nice spot. And that's 15 years ago. So I can't even imagine the rent is probably $130,000 now.
Right.
And that's Boston. It's not New York City. So, I mean, I think that things definitely need to change on the rent fund. So, hopefully there's more support there moving forward. And I just saw something on the news about Cambridge Square. They were talking about how the rent is so high that a lot of the places like closed during, like before the pandemic, and all these chains are moving in because they're the only ones who can afford to live there or to have their businesses there. And one place that actually I used to frequent all the time called La Crema, it was an amazing coffee shop. She had to close down, and this is pre-pandemic, because her rent went up 3 times what it was. So one day her landlord called her. It's my husband in the background, everybody. One day, her landlord called her and was like, your rent's going to be starting next month, your rent's going to be 3 times what you're paying right now. So just imagine that. Like, let's just say, for the fact of, I don't want to do math, she was paying $10,000. Now she's going to pay $30,000 a month. Like, that's insane.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
Like, where are you supposed to get 3 times the amount of money?
Right? And she was like, I was doing well. Like, I was doing okay. So this is like, I don't know. It's just crazy to me. So rent, I could go off on a tangent about this. Obviously I just did, right. But yeah, definitely something to think about moving forward. There should probably be limits. You know what I mean? It's just, we put limits on how much you can charge somebody for housing. So maybe it's time to put limits on businesses as well. If there isn't already, I don't know how that works. So, and then the next thing is fines. We talked to Andrew last week, and he was saying how he worked really hard to get in New York City, to get them to basically, instead of, so every time, like, let's say like the health inspector or liquor licensing board comes into your business, you're just waiting for the fine to come. Like, you're like, okay, what did I do wrong? And they nitpick, and it's like things that like no one does them right. You know what I mean? And so they don't, instead of teaching you how to change it, they just hand you a bill, and then you have to go in front of the city council and try to fight it if you don't want to pay it. And it happens all the time. I mean, I was in front of Boston City Council more times than I can count. And I won't say her name, but she wasn't a very nice lady. The head of the licensing board. I think she still is the head of the licensing board in Boston, so I won't say her name. But yeah, it's just ridiculous. And it was these minor things, you know, and I can understand those things that are very, like, there's mold in your, all over your kitchen. Yeah, of course, right. Shut them down. Like, that's like a serious thing. But like small, tiny little things, like you didn't cover the bottles correctly behind the bar, or like, I don't even know. I can't even remember, but they were dumb. And it was like, come on. Right. So he worked really hard, because especially during the pandemic, all these restaurants were getting all these fines because the regulations were changing every day. Everything was different. Like, today, do it this way, don't do it this way. Now, okay, now that's dangerous. Do it this way, don't do it this way. And so he worked really hard to get a lot of these turned into, warnings. And so you don't get a fine, you get taught something, and then you have to change it. And if you change it the next time they come in, you don't pay a fine. And that makes so much sense. But if you didn't change it, now you should get a fine. So I think that making fines more educational and more of a warning is something that should be done everywhere. I mean, it just makes sense. Right. And I don't think that the people who come into the building and give you these fines, I don't really think they want to, but they feel like they have to, because if they don't, they're going to get a slap on the wrist at their job. So I think a lot needs to change there. And then next one that I want to talk about that I know, I'm sorry. Third-party delivery companies. So before the pandemic, we were already moving in the right direction with rules and regulations, especially in New York City and LA, to prohibit third-party delivery companies from overcharging restaurants. So once the pandemic hit and restaurants rushed to put together these delivery programs, some of the pushes for regulating these fees were sidelined for obvious reasons. But the conversation has definitely been brought to the forefront again. And I think we need to look at it again and reevaluate the fees and how much they're charging. And if it warrants, these businesses being able to charge this type of incredibly huge fees to the restaurants. That's all I'm going to say. Because
I think that there was, when we posted about this in the past, I think it was Whitney Ecker from Etch was commented saying how they used something else. I can't remember exactly what the name was, but it was like a subscription, and they didn't charge on the percentage. It was more like you paid a flat fee for a month. It was like a monthly fee, and that's, I
think I remember that too. Yeah, I think Megan from Bostonia also uses, like, she was talking about it too. I think they both talked about the same company. I'll have to figure out which one that was. But Yeah, I do agree. I think there are great ones out there, and I don't think they're all bad. I just think, you see these commercials on TV and it's like, look at how we're supporting the restaurant industry, and like you should use us when you order food, and like Grubhub and even Uber Eats was like charging ridiculous fees, but in the end, the restaurant's not making any money off that order. They're
Right.
actually losing money off of the order because they're getting charged so many fees. So I was actually like last weekend, I wanted Thai food really bad. So I went on the website and they have like online ordering. So I went through the whole thing because it never said it was Grubhub. Like the whole time I thought it was them and their ordering system. And then I got to the end and it was like to pay, and like the Grubhub thing came up and I was like, oh no. So I just like X'd it out, and then I called the restaurant and they were like, and I asked them, I said, do you do the deliveries, or do you use like a third party delivery? And they were like, oh, we use Grubhub because we don't have enough delivery guys. We couldn't bring them all back. And I was like, okay, I'll come pick it up. Like, it's not worth it to me for you because I'm ordering literally one thing. So you're not going to make any money off of this. Right. And I didn't even know it was Grubhub until the very, very end. It looked like their website. So, right. Again, it's just, it's one of those things. Change definitely needs to happen there. Yeah. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up that we really haven't talked about a ton is ID&E, so inclusion, diversity, and equity. And this point is a bit different, obviously, than the ones that we just spoke about, but I didn't want to leave it out because although it's not a monetary issue in the industry, it's an important one that we need to talk about more, I think. So, 2020 and now into 2021 has been groundbreaking years for fighting social and racial injustices in every aspect of our lives, not just in work. But recent protests and the conversations we're now having about systemic racism have brought to light longstanding issues of racial inequality and social injustice in, like I said before, in all aspects of our lives. So the restaurant industry has historically been known as a very diverse workforce. So the industry is full of people of all ages, races, ethnicities, sexual orientation, religion, culture. And actually, I found this stat today. According to the US Census Bureau, 47% of restaurant employees are minorities, so almost half, which is huge. But and this is a very big but, that stat doesn't reveal that although half of the restaurant industry's workforce is racially diverse, only 30% of minorities are in a management position, and then only 8% are in an executive level. So that's a very small number. And that includes, that I shouldn't have just said racially diverse, because that does include, the sexual orientation, ethnicities, like I said, ages also. So it encompasses everything. Right. But it's not high enough. I mean, clearly, and it's funny because I've found working in hospitality that there are a lot of women in higher positions in hospitality. I think it's a very predominantly female industry in a lot of ways. But when you're talking about executive level, I'm talking about management positions, right? Executive level, I don't think I've ever met a female worked with a company that had a female at the executive top level. So in minority races, definitely not. So that's a huge problem, I think. And I really think it's time for owners and operators to take a good hard look at their business's employees and maybe start to build their own ID&E programs. We just built one at Tripleseat, and it's amazing. And we're all part of it, and I think it's important, and it keeps the conversation going, and it's going to fix and change, a lot of those issues that we're having. And change really does start at the top of the workforce. So if you're a management position, or you're an operator or an owner, it's definitely your responsibility to help make that change happen. And it's an important change. And I think, especially when it comes to race, we really need to make that change. I mean, yes, it's known that the restaurant industry is diverse and that's great and all, but it's true. It's not at the top, and that definitely needs to change. So that's my 2 cents.
I mean, I totally agree. I remember there was an episode that we did during the pandemic, way back, and we talked about I think it was a restaurant or hotel that was being opened in DC that was the whole theme was about female empowerment, and they were only hiring everyone was going to be a female, and like the higher ups were all, and they're all about diversity and that whole sentiment, which was awesome. And I think even like with this rescue plan, how they're prioritizing like female owned businesses and restaurants for the first to receive the money, like things like little things like that.
That's great.
But then overall, like you just said, like the bigger picture and like on a day-to-day basis, your hires, your team, who has what position is crucial, especially now in 2021.
And there's always been that stigma, you know, like the head. So let's just say like the head chef in a restaurant is usually a white guy. And then everyone beneath him is usually someone of foreign speaking countries, right? Like that's how I'll put it that way. And that's such a stigma. But it's so real. Like it's so real. And like, you know, all these things about like, well, a lot of them are illegal and they get paid under the table. And it's like all these things. And that it's just not, that part of it isn't true. Like the majority of restaurant workers in the kitchen that I've worked with who do not speak English as their first language are legal citizens, you know, or becoming one. So there's definitely a lot of stereotypes. And they need to change. It needs to change. And it's been historically, if you look back, like in restaurants, if you watch like old movies or like anything, and it's always those people of other races are the ones serving you, and, you know, all these things, females, you know, predominantly. So I think that it's important that we really take a hard look at, because other industries are taking a hard look at it, right? So it's time for the hospitality industry, once they get their feet, you know, they're back on their feet, it's time to really focus on creating some of these ID&E programs and making sure that everyone is getting a fair chance.
Right. Yeah. It's good that we're talking about it, and hopefully other people are too.
Agreed.
Well, I mean, that was a lot on the Restaurant Relief Fund. And I mean, just off the cuff here, I feel like 2021 is just going to be a better year, and this is going to push everyone in the right direction. And we're literally entering spring like this weekend. And so outdoor dining is opening up again. So like,
excited.
Events, we're seeing events come in with Tripleseat. So many of our customers are getting
leads are coming in.
Yeah. So this is like, I think it's just, we're feeling the energy, hopefully back in an optimistic direction. This fund, this weather, this energy, we're just going to keep that into 2021. And we're hoping that our customers like are really benefiting from that, and restaurants everywhere. So. Yeah.
So use some of those stimmy checks to support your local restaurants.
Stimmy. Such a weird word.
Isn't it? It's such a, like, I was like, at first I was like, wait, stimmy? What is she talking about? Then I was like, oh, stimulus check.
Another reason to be on TikTok.
Yeah, I know. You know, I love my TikTok. It's really sad, actually. I go down some rabbit holes there, but yeah,
don't even talk to me about that.
I'm not, but I also saw a lot of stuff in Clubhouse on these topics. I haven't joined any of them because they've been at times that I couldn't join in live, but yeah, Clubhouse has a lot of great stuff for the hospitality industry. They did I saw like one group did an entire thing around, I don't know what you call it in Clubhouse. What do you call it? Like
you call it a room, a chat room.
A room, right. Okay. So they did a whole chat room on this Restaurant Relief Fund. One of the groups did yesterday. So honestly, I think it's definitely a good tool.
If you're listening to the episode from this point and you're on Clubhouse and you've used it for the hospitality industry, then let us know, because we're honestly interested about trying to maybe put like event stuff on there with Tripleseat. I
think eventually, if we did one for the Two Chicks Seats, I think that would be kind of cool. Right. We could have more like talks about situation, not just the podcast, but in Clubhouse as well. So yeah, definitely friend us.
let us know. Email us at 2chicks3seats@tripleseat.com, as always.
Yeah. And if you liked this episode, along with all of our other episodes, give us that 5-star rating and hit subscribe. And we will talk to all of you next week. Happy spring. Woo!